Welcome to the Messy City Podcast, where we talk about creating the kinds of always changing, wonderfully messy cities and towns that we humans clearly love. We'll talk with those people trying to revive them or create them anew, whether they be designers, developers, builders, planners, or just anyone interested in the conversation. Thanks so much for listening. Hi, everyone. This is Kevin Klinkenberg. This is the second of two podcasts that I recorded this year at the Strong Towns National Gathering and the CNU Congress in Cincinnati, Ohio. And I'll have more to say about Cincinnati, hopefully, in upcoming episodes, which I was really, really impressed with. Had a great time there and would love to explore a lot more. This conversation is with Aaron Lubeck, who I've had on the program before. Another guy who really touches the conversation about cities in so many different ways, from developing them to thinking about how to plan them, how to adjust for policy changes that could really help. Just a really great wide-ranging conversation. There's a big chunk of it that we actually didn't even capture on the recording because we sat down to start to just warm up and talk about things, and lo and behold, half an hour later, we realized that we had just been talking about a wide range of stuff and not even recording. So, as you can tell, that it's very easy to talk to Aaron. I love people who have lots of opinions and are willing to share them. And I thought Aaron is one of those guys. So I hope you enjoyed this conversation. As always, take care. So why did you decide, personally, to engage and produce so much more content than what you've been doing?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I don't know that I have a moment that triggered it. I know I've been blessed to be a part of this movement, both with NTBA and the Incremental Development Alliance and Congress for New Urbanism, and working with Bob Chapman for years. That's been introduced me to so many people and so many great ideas, and I feel like potentially I hope I've been additive to those conversations. But when you engage with such talented people, you come up with your own ideas. You try to build on what they're doing, and feel like I got a few things to say. It's interesting. I get compliments now and again on what I'm writing, or interested takes on them, and I hope it's additive to solve the bigger problems we're dealing with. Some of it's you do writing as well, and some of it's personal and it's journaling in a way, just getting out thoughts. It's whether anybody reads it or not, sometimes it's insular and it's like, I'm just trying to flesh out my own ideas, and if other people like it, that's cool too. But I've really enjoyed it. Obviously, that's part of that's been Southern Urbanism with the magazine that I started, and taking some roles, not only producing that, but writing for it. And some of it's been a more localized approach with the On Housing blog on Substack. Just getting out thoughts and trying to figure it out like everybody else.
So, a lot of people in our world, we kind of cross into multiple subjects. You've decided to really just focus on housing pretty much. It's like the blog is called On Housing. So you want to talk more about why you really wanted to focus on that area?
I mean, housing has been, my career has been in housing. I was a restoration contractor for 10 years, doing pretty much exclusively historic restorations in Durham, North Carolina. Last 10 years have focused more on infill residential housing, Southern traditional CNU type housing. And although at times I wish I knew more about commercial because I think I'd love it and be good at it, really my whole career has been in residential. And so I get it from a little bit of a Renaissance man approach. I know how to design it, I know how to build it, I follow and understand housing policy, I understand zoning codes, I can talk coherently on what's working and what's not. And I think bringing all those together to come up with stews of why things work and why they don't is interesting. It's certainly intellectually interesting, and I don't claim to know all the answers. Certainly, I don't. But it helps to have a little bit of skills in all of those, because you can more quickly find the dead ends. So, whether it's, oh yeah, we'd love to build towers, that sounds great, but no, you can't because a single stair. And so you can get to the truth of the actual solutions the more of a Renaissance approach you take to it, which again takes years to, there's a tacit knowledge that comes with 20 years of practice that you just can't have out of college. And so trying to, explore those while staying specific to residential housing, I think it allows a deeper dive to happen that hopefully is useful.
Yeah. So we were talking before then that you also really are particularly interested in the YIMBY movement and kind of tying more into that. And I mean, how do you see your role as plugging into and helping that movement, critiquing it if it needs critique, or helping it grow?
Yeah, it's been interesting to follow from afar because unlike most movements, which kind of move East Coast to West Coast, this one was emphatically started in San Francisco, and just had in many ways its sort of 10th anniversary and birthday. I was arguing with some of the founders out there. I was like, what was the origin point of the movement? But I know I'm fascinated with it because it's faster growing than the movements we more traditionally associate with, like new urbanism. It's motivated. It's pissed off young people. It's people who have in many ways been screwed by bad policy, who are kept out of what we think of the American dream in many ways, but even just the ability to form a household, to buy a house, to get married, to have kids is harder for 25-year-olds today than it was for 25-year-olds when we were. And so I've always noticed that, and again, through general understanding and tacit knowledge of home building, you can spot the ways that young people are being screwed. And I think the most obvious solutions from that are the YIMBY movement is the dominant voice that is solving those issues, mostly through zoning reform and statewide reform, and still very Californian-based. It's like one of the few good things coming out of California these days. And it's interesting to apply those value sets to places like the South, which are not as dense, redder, have opportunities still for home buying for young people for the most part, but are also really fast-growing, unlike California. So there's like a different stew going on. And it's also interesting where the YIMBYs on the West Coast are almost exclusively advocates and not practitioners, not architects, not builders, not developers. In the South, it's almost the opposite. And so there are people like Kronberg or myself who are doing the work. And so there's an obvious stew there that's kind of helpful to align you need the people who are doing the building and designing the homes, and you need the people who are raising hell in Sacramento to get these reforms done.
And who actually know how to do that.
And who know how to do it and are motivated to do it, because it's thankless hours. It's miserable hours to go sit through a 6-hour meeting to go talk for two minutes upon supporting a thing. Yeah. And they're doing it. It's really only happened in the last 10 years. It's continually growing, and they're bucking a system. I mean, Californian planning was probably the worst in the world. And Sonia Trout started showing up to council meetings. They talked about this in the book Golden Gates. She started showing up to planning commissions, going like, Kevin, I protest your 10-story building because it's not 20 stories, and I need a place to live. Literally. And the system out there had no ability to process that because the entire system was rigged. It's like, no, you propose 20 stories, then you go to planning commission and they negotiate you to 10, then you go to city council and they negotiate you to 5, and this is just the game. Everybody plays it. And it's bullshit. And they finally, YIMBY movement called bullshit on it, and by using things like Twitter really exposed what was frankly a scam and is very effective at it.
Yeah, so I want to kind of touch on a little bit more on what you were saying. That there's something that really interests me. Obviously, you're right, the YIMBY movement really grew out of politically blue states where development and the building of housing has become very, very hard. And so they've kind of manufactured a housing crisis from scratch.
Absolutely.
Yet, we live in places where we still have like a lot of the same restrictions. So you're in North Carolina, which is a fast-growing state. It's a red state that's a fast-growing state. I live in Missouri, which is a red state that's a slow-growing state. And I'm really curious how you think about the YIMBY movement in those contexts, because when I think about it, it's like I don't feel like our issues are at the state level, at the state legislature level, but we still have issues. They're like real issues, and we just don't butt up against them as much because we're not a fast growth.
That's right.
Region.
The state level is kind of the nuke button. I mean, it's really where you don't want to go. And California hit the nuke button, and we're seeing the effects of it. I mean, every year, Nolan Gray and the groups at California YIMBY, I mean, they're basically facilitating 5 or 10 state preemptive rules, and they've done this for the past couple years. And the obvious consequences of that, if you lose local control, which has some benefits of subsidiarity, you can kind of paint with a broad brush, you can kind of miss the mark, but things got so bad that they went to war. And that's where they are. I would like to hope that's a signal to the Missouri state legislatures in North Carolina, Texas, Florida, and so forth. You don't want to get that bad.
Right.
This is what happens if you keep passing, or cities basically act as children and can't pass basic rules to allow people to build duplexes and ADUs or build a 12-plex without parking or simple stuff. So it's really fascinating how those principles apply to non-blue states, because North Carolina and Missouri are not California.
Right.
And it's fascinating also that this is really still shaken out on political lines. We'd like to think housing is not a blue or red thing. And in the South, you see the red, but really both parties breaking NIMBY and YIMBY in weird ways. I think the Florida Republican Party at times has really stood up for pro-suburbanism, no zoning changes, this and that. The North Carolina Republican Party is actually leading pretty big state preemptive bills to legalize 1 to 4 family in the residential code, which is a totally revolutionary reform for affordable housing. There's a big... I think in a lot of these red states, there are certainly Republican legislators who are thrilled to stick it to blue cities if they can. Others are more sincere, just property rights advocates or small business advocates. I was talking to somebody in the high up in the Democratic leadership of North Carolina, and I was like, this is housing really should be a blue issue. This is happening in cities. The cities are all blue, even in a state like North Carolina. Yeah. And you don't get triangulated on this. Like this is the perfect example of how Clinton triangulated the Republicans on welfare reform. The housing is, I think, so ripe for the Republicans to triangulate the Democrats, because they can come out for zoning reform, they can come out for YIMBY principles, and they literally have nothing to lose because they're not winning cities anyway.
Right.
So they can stick the finger in the eye. It's not hard to find blue NIMBYs. I mean, some of the worst NIMBYs are of the left. And they can point that out, they can support zoning reform, and they have literally nothing to lose. And I think as long as the Democrats and Biden in this election don't really emphatically stand up for housing, not just words, but really stand up for it, I think we're going to see the Democratic Party triangulated on it, and it will be fumbling the ball at the goal line.
Yeah, when we talk about this issue and so many issues in our world that we care about, like with urbanism and cities, it always gets to that place where you get such tremendous frustration with both sides of the political aisle. We've talked a lot about the frustrations that you have often in very progressive cities where there seems to be a lot, a base that's hell bent on just destroying capitalism, for whatever reason, and just some really, really harmful policies. But then you get caught up in these damn culture wars, and it's progressives live in cities, and they want to build more housing, so I'm a Republican, so I have to be against that.
Right.
Which is it's so frustrating. I'm curious, so in the North Carolina example where you had some Republicans working on the code reform, how did they get to that place? How were they able to get to a talking point or something where they could come around to supporting it?
So it's interesting. North Carolina is a weird place because they're in supermajority, so there need not be talking points because they can just pass stuff.
Yeah.
A lot of it comes through the HBA, which is, for better or for worse. I've always had a rocky relationship with the statewide, HBA generally, because they do seem like, we exist to not support sprawl, and HBA is a primary driver of sprawl, and blah, blah, blah. Yeah. I think the local HBAs have actually been really good and have a lot of infill builders and do good events and help people try to build better stuff. But the statewide HBA is the one who is writing and advocating for most state preemptive reforms. Some of them are good, some of them are not. The code reform, 1 to 4 family, which I had a small role in seeding, really kind of frankly coming from John Anderson's idea. So in many ways it kind of originates from the CNU, was an idea I put out 7 years ago. I had no idea it was going to be included in a bill last year. But I don't think anybody at state legislature knows this stuff. So there is a seeding in these smaller states that you can take ideas out of a CNU and just put them into the wild, and they float around for a while and then get enacted. I wish new urbanism was more active with that, because I think that there are a lot of willing legislators who want to do the values and things we see here, but because there's no like active lobbying or advocacy, was the whole purpose of moving the damn organization to Washington D.C. to do more of this. You just really don't see it, and it happens to be through direct advocacy of people like me and you just talking with the legislator. I mean, we're probably going to bill it. There's going to be more bills coming up on eliminating parking mandates statewide. That happened in Minnesota. It fizzled out, but like tip of the iceberg, it's coming. And if I think those are more often than not originate from practitioners and people who understand why things don't work, and then you find sympathetic legislators who say, yeah, that does make sense, that's stupid, let's fix that.
Right.
But they appreciate being talking to people who have the experience, because most of them are lawyers or they do other things. They don't understand urbanism, but they're grateful that people who do understand it are speaking with them, and they make at the end of the day they make their own judgments. So it is, Texas is going through some state preemptive stuff.
Yeah.
All of it's fascinating.
But it is interesting, because then you see the counterexample like in Florida, where you're right, where it seems like the Florida Republicans are playing definitely into the NIMBY card. It's like you're not gonna change our single family zoning, and it's a crazy aspect of the culture wars that I understand it, I guess, but it's just so annoying and frustrating.
There's a tipping point, and we see this in the South, and to a lesser extent California, which is a very suburban state, unfortunately, basically was built up at the time of terrible zoning and Euclidean this and that. And the South has really been booming more even recently. So there's a tipping point where most of Florida is suburban. So there's a basic math problem that once you go suburban, it's hard to go back, because the majority of the electorate is in this sort of what we would consider a Ponzi scheme-y thing, but they're not going to vote against their own interests. And so there's a real, I don't know if it's game theory or whatever, challenge to actually enact these things. I kind of feel like a broader solution is, I would call it the great resorting, or the great a grand bargain that kind of dichotomizes America. It's like there's an urban way of life, and there's an urban value sets of entrepreneurship and opportunity, and kind of chaotic, a little bit more chaotic and free. And there's a long history of this. The country was founded on this. And there's a suburban way of life. And I may talk about it pejoratively like you would, where things are fixed, things are predictable, climax condition, nothing ever changes. Very, if you're a single parent and want all your neighbors to look in the same house as you and have it predictable, there's nothing wrong with it. I mean, we can argue there is, but like perfectly good families raise perfectly good kids in it.
Yeah, sure.
And we can accept people want that. And if it's just separate them, stop suburbanizing the damn city, we'll stop urbanizing the suburbs, and we could all get on really well. That's what it needs to go to, but how to get there.
Yeah, something I wrote a long time ago. Let urban be urban and let suburban be suburban.
It's exactly
just like
right.
If we could just draw that bargain for now, like that's not the perfect new urbanist world we all want, but that would be immensely better.
It kind of is in a way. I mean, when we think of old urbanism and freeing the cities, I mean, Eric Kronberg's practice, he will not do suburban work, and most of Atlanta is suburban work. He's just like, there's like 3 centuries worth of urbanism to do in Atlanta. Why would I do suburban work? And I do think the solution is that simple, and maybe it shakes out. I mean, again, Euclid is probably unflippable, but I would like to think that Euclid, if Euclid ever went down, it might be the basic logic would say this was a taking, this was unconstitutional.
Right.
Any city chartered before 1926, zoning's gone. Figure it out, make your own private agreements, whatever, but it was unconstitutional, we flipped it. If the charter was chartered after 1926, which was basically most of the suburbs, then you bought the farm. You already knew what you bought, so you guys are good. And that's how it could shake out, and it would free the cities and allow young people to have this rebirth. Basically, it would reopen the frontier. It just wouldn't be a cow pasture. It would be Kansas
urban
City.
Frontier.
So, and then we could, people would have opportunity. You could very easily choose. You could move back between the two. It's just 2 different ways of life. Both are valid, and it could work.
Yeah. I like that. Well, I do want to talk about a couple of the pieces that you wrote recently that really caught my attention. One of them, let's keep on the housing front. You had this piece where you talked about you want to restart the Sears the manufactured house, like the Sears factory home idea. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what led you to that process, and are you actually taking steps along this route, or is this like a thought? process?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both. I've been blessed with a couple of different engagements recently. I've worked with Bill Allison over at Allison Ramsey Architects. I know you've got some of your plans with them as well. Big believer in their business and their quality of architecture and sort of their approach to solving problems. And the stock plan model, I think, is really critical for getting great architecture in the hands of small builders who can't afford a custom architect to do spec homes. And so their catalog of beautiful homes, it stood out to me that I was like, oh, well, it's a catalog of homes. So that leads you over to Sears, and everybody knows the Sears homes, mostly upper Midwest, but kind of all over the country, that were container packed. And what was interesting is that Bill Allison's been doing stock plans longer than Sears ever did.
Wow.
Sears did it for 32 years. Bill's been doing it 40. Sears, I think the numbers are in the article, had something like 700 plans, with a lot, but not like unlimited. Allison Ramsey's got like 3,500. So there's like, and then you get into this fascinating, well, why'd we stop doing that? Is there a valid model there? What would it look like? And
Why did the Sears factory home stop? What do you?
a couple things. I wrote about this in my first book, Green Restorations, which is now 15 years old. If I recall the story, but they built from 1908 to 1940, and they were the Amazon of its day. Unbelievable supply chain, particularly for its time, and factories all over the place, and the logistics was like mind-bending of how big they were. And one, the war happened, but two, and then Levittown afterwards was sort of a different way of building. They kind of got caught up in what would be the subprime lending crisis of its day. Before, I think, 1930 or 1920, homes were basically in cash. There was no mortgage. And Sears, because of their reach and supply chain and scale, started doing mortgages, which they're really fascinating to look at, but I think they were something like 5 years, maybe 50% down. Very different than what we have today, but a lot of them were out. They were out during the Depression, and they got caught with that, and that kind of ended that line of work. I don't know the exact process. And getting into World War II, we came out of it with Levittown, and it really never came back. And I don't know. I mean, there's an easy critique of it that it's, through all of the innovation of, we have the next best thing since sliced bread way to build a house, and it's concrete 3D printing, and it's, boxable, or we'll crane in an ADU, and mass timber, all these things. Most, you shake out and you're like, yeah, none of that's actually cheaper.
Right.
And we've had these debates with some leaders in the CNU, particularly with National Town Builders Association. I've argued this stuff with Bob Chapman and Andres Duany and Bill Allison, and people talk about manufactured homes are the solution, and mobile homes are the solution, but Bill Allison thinks you panelize it and bring it in. And my argument was, especially for these smaller homes, we're still stick building because the whole industry is built for it. And one of the things that Andres was right on this, like one of the sclerotic points when you're building $100,000 or $200,000 home, where everything, like, Fernando Pages Ruiz is like, every decision matters, efficiency. If you have to do an inspection at the factory and in the field, you've already lost. Like, just coordinating that adds variables. Yeah. And so if you take that as the premise, then you really need to be out of manufacturing in the factory for these. It's truer the smaller the home gets. And so you get back into this container packed homes, and you can do a SketchUp model of like how much of a home can you pack in a 20-foot intermodal container. And we did that. You can pack a 500 square foot Allison Ramsey cottage, all of it, in a container. The only thing it misses is just the same as Sears, no foundation, because they vary by region and topography and all that. And usually the mechanicals wouldn't be in it, but sheetrock, framing, windows, doors, toilets, electrical fixtures, cabinets, countertops, whatever, pack it all in there, 20-foot container. And it's become somewhat revolutionary for, gosh, where could this be useful? I did habitat site plans and construction drawings for about 7 years locally where I am. And it's all these houses are so messy to build, and there's 1,000 trips back and forth to Lowe's. It's like the definition of inefficiency. But what if the entire home shows up in your yard, everything, and it's basically an IKEA cabinet? Like, it takes work, but like, it's paint by numbers, it's all there, there's no waste. How much more efficiently you can build a house as a small builder or nonprofit is amazing. And so whether it's backyard cottages or homes way out in the country that are not near a Lowe's, like, it opens up opportunities for fathers and sons to just go build a house where you wouldn't do it if you have to go to Lowe's and figure it out all on your own. So there's just all these benefits towards packing a house in a container. And I'll close with pointing out, when Sears did it, intermodal shipping didn't exist.
Yeah.
I forgot when it started, but it was after World War II. So their shipping was mostly a train car. I've really dug into trying to figure out, well, you can't get a train car to, random street in Chicago. So they were basically dumping the stuff in a train yard, and then the builder and whatever the F-150 equivalent was in 1912 was shuffling back and forth. It was still pretty damn efficient, right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the first phase of getting it from the factory on the train to the destination was probably incredibly efficient.
Well, hopefully,
great.
yeah.
But then after that, it's got to get to a site.
It's got to get there, and you had to park it at a train station for a while.
Right.
So all of that is actually better now,
Yes.
which is the way it should be. So you can plop down a container in your yard and just take it out as needed and lock it up. So I think there's all sorts of opportunities to do that. We're kind of looking for opportunities to pilot that. I think it's an extraordinary business opportunity. I think it could be $1 billion business opportunity.
Yeah.
I do think in the startup world that capitalizes those things, the Silicon Valley world is sort of uniquely not qualified to do it because it takes a world who understands land use and building and design, and
that's more of a manufacturing challenge than a tech challenge.
It's not a software problem.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's one of those things. Housing to scale a solution that is transformative is a capital. I mean, it's a lot of capital. So we're keeping an eye out for opportunities. I think there are opportunities of places to pilot this where I am and really all over the country, and hope to have the opportunity to pilot it in the future.
But it seems like there's a great nexus between that idea and the building code reform idea, which you talked about, like the 1 to 4 family thing.
Yeah.
So like we're in a previous era, those Sears Craftsman homes, and we had tons of them in Kansas City. I know them really well too. Like those were great single family homes and very affordable for a lot of people. But it seems like the next generation challenge is more like the duplex, the triplex, the fourplex.
Yeah.
And and sort of figuring out how to make that work from a streamlined manufacturing standpoint.
Yeah.
And distribution is an incredible opportunity.
Yeah, and challenge, to be fair. And I know, we figure, not that I've thought this out that far to that scale, but, I think the simplest thing is to build some really great 500 and 600 square foot cottages.
Yeah,
and you
sure.
can figure out,
Test it, yeah.
And you can figure out problems that are very relevant to building a quadruplex that way. Maybe it's 2 containers or 3 containers or 4 containers, or you end up still stick framing the thing traditionally, but all of the cabinets and countertops and windows and doors all come in a container that makes it more efficient. And a lot of these are marginal gains. My suspicion is the model works best with small homes and best in a repeatable world. So I think we're at really the upswing of a great movement of cottage courts and intentional communities, which are great to build, infill places in all over Kansas City and where I am in Durham, to build these little micro communities of 5 or 10 homes that have some intentional bond that comes between them, and where the houses are pretty similar, if not identical. And those opportunities are going to grow. And those would be, great. I've got an acre and I've got a church group that wants to live together or support young folk housing or whatever their intention is, and you can just get 10 of these containers. And again, you're sort of lowering the bar for what it takes to build. You're getting into the habitat world, or you're getting into the world of like, I'm a carpenter but not a builder, but I can assemble an IKEA cabinet. So I can do this. I can do this. And that's sort of like retrading America, which I think also has societal benefits. So just almost endless opportunities, and I hope something will come of it.
That would be pretty cool. That'd be a fun thing to pursue, and maybe somebody's listening who wants to partner up with Aaron on that and try to figure out how to take the next step.
There's somebody out there who wants to reboot the Sears model.
A lot of things, it probably feels like you need like a really good greenfield project to test it on, where the permitting, you don't have to really sweat too much, and it's in a high enough growth area that there's demand, so you can.
I think all those are the easy parts. Actually, I mean, we're blessed in Durham. We've got a really great zoning code that encourages small homes. We've seen a boom in starter homes because of reforms that the city council did in 2019. It's actually finding land for it is not the problem. Finding demand. You build small cottages in a place like most of America now, like 1 bedrooms are. You can fill them up all day. It's the most rentable or sellable thing ever. Right. So it's really a capital problem, and maybe leadership. It's a little bit out of my sweet spot to run a company like this. But I think really finding the capital source who believes that this is a business model that's valid and worth rebooting could get this pilot executed. And I think that would be a great thing to see, and a lot of things would be learned.
Yeah, very cool. I agree. So I want to talk about Jane Jacobs.
Yeah.
You also had a piece.
Sorry.
No, it's good.
How about it?
It's all good. We're recording. We're not recording. Doesn't matter.
Who knows?
Editing is always a useful thing.
Good. How about it? All about it.
So you had this piece about Jane Jacobs recently that I really enjoyed. That was talking a bit about how how much we talk about her and her principles, but those principles have not really, as much as we might think they've really taken hold in the planning profession, they really haven't.
Yeah.
I wonder if you could just kind of expand on what you were talking about there.
Sure. Gosh, there's so much with Jane. I write the Jacobs column in Southern Urbanism, the magazine that I founded. I think we've done 3 or 4 essays in that are mostly trying to take the value sets that she wrote about through a 60, 70-year writing career, pretty much through the lens of New York and Toronto, very dense northeastern cities, and applying those value sets to the South, which are different in many ways. Most importantly, not being dense at all. People. It's interesting now because here's our reality. Much of the modern planning world and the urban planners that we love and sometimes have tension with would probably identify with existing in her image.
Yeah, no doubt.
They follow. It's hard to find a planner who rejects Jane Jacobs.
Right.
And I think some get her, but most of modern planning is built upon a misreading of her. And everybody's trying to co-opt Jane Jacobs, but what you see NIMBYs tend to do is that Jane Jacobs was a NIMBY and that she stopped bad development from ruining her neighborhood, which is true. What they leave off is what kind of development they were stopping, because she was most famous for stopping Robert Moses's indiscretions for taking freeways through lower Manhattan and all over New York that would have destroyed ethnic neighborhoods, which she was successful in stopping, and taking down ethnic neighborhoods to build big kind of monolithic modernist public housing projects. So there's a misreading of her where people say, well, Jane Jacobs believed community engagement. No, you have to ask the community what they want, and the community decides, and then they dictate the developer, which she never said. She was an entrepreneur, a defender of entrepreneurialism, frankly, and a defender of incrementalism and incremental development, kind of an anti-intellectual, which was weird. But was a great defender of everything small and incremental and organic. I mean, that's what the Sidewalk Ballet was. And, her most famous book starts with the declaration, this book is an attack on city planning. That's the first thing in Death and Life. And so it's been interesting to see where Thomas Campanella, who's a professor at Carolina, I think he's now at Cornell, wrote a beautiful piece on Jane Jacobs' 100th birthday, and he said, never has any profession so completely abdicated their powers, where after Jane Jacobs sort of kind of stopped the authoritarian planning movement and rebirthed this new movement I would call the participatory era that we're in today, where the profession has largely abdicated all of their control and professional agency to the community, often the mob, and being deferential to it, where it becomes sort of, in its worst, impotent to execute. And so there's this very interesting tension between Jane Jacobs has a rocky relationship with the planning profession.
I feel like the profession kind of took 2 of the worst lessons, really. One, which was we have to defer to this community engagement process for everything, no matter how small or how big it is. And that whoever the self-identified community members are that show up, they're the ones we have to listen to, whether that's like 1% of a neighborhood or not. And then secondly, I think rightfully most people read it and they're like, oh yeah, we really missed that whole like mixed use walkability thing. That's really important. So now what we have to do is just create regulations that create that. And as if that can be planned from like a central administrative agency and all of the smart people that work there. And it's like I know lots of planners that I really like and that are smart people and they're really have all the right goals and everything else. But there's a real deep critique in her work, which is that you can't create cities through that kind of centralized planning approach.
I mean, translate her thesis as this: urban planning is an oxymoron.
Yeah.
Cities aren't planned. It's particularly in the new way. The great cities were actually millions of people making millions of individual decisions and bringing some sort of order to the chaos through that. The old city planning, which of course New York was a great example of, is that there was people in government who actually platted the streets, reserved the civic spaces, and then let people privately build. Of course, we don't do that anymore. And there's this great sort of, and she talks about this in oh God, I'm forgetting the name of it. It's not Economies of Cities. One of her later books, she divides guardian culture and commerce culture very clearly and talks about things go wrong when each does the other, when regulators start to dictate private development and when private development starts to dictate regulations, it doesn't work well. And yeah, I mean, when public entities start dictating the private realm, things go horribly wrong. And I think we've seen this.
Was that that may have been in Dark Age Ahead? Was that?
I think it was earlier than Dark Age Ahead, but it might have been. I think, it's a.
Or maybe she revisited that.
She might have. She was very pessimistic in Dark Age Ahead.
Yeah, towards the end of her life, she got, and, but it's interesting to read that book because there's a lot of stuff that's very prescient in there.
Authoritarian rulers are coming. I think that was like 20 years ago.
Yeah.
I mean, and she died in her 90s, I think.
Yeah.
And it's interesting now that we see, I think, a lot of zoning codes which become bigger and bigger and more oppressive and really missing the mark. I mean, we're farther and farther away from traditional planning in the Olmstedian fashion of this exists to manage the public realm, streets, parks, utilities, period, and you're done. And there's a clear divide, which I think modern form codes are trying to reestablish. That there's the private world, which planners need to stay out of, and there's the public world, which they need to do. And by focusing all on the private world, the planning profession is not only screwing up the private world, it's also abdicating the public world. And throughout the South, and I'm sure Kansas City, our streets suck, our parks suck, and our utilities have problems. And so there's just a little bit of like stay in your lane-ish for all parties that would, I think, a rebirth of the industry we'll see.
Yeah, I always felt like there's a huge difference between planning, which is a good thing, which is, establishing, a framework for the built environment. Savannah being obviously one of the more famous examples. But there are many, and, even the humble railroad town of the West was planned, often just by like a humble surveyor, but it was planned. There's a big difference between that and then micro-regulating every aspect of the built environment. And somehow the city planning movement, which started as a reform movement to basically guide better planning of cities, became a movement to just administratively regulate every private action.
And in many ways being through the participatory era, which I think we're in now, and I believe is on the decline and will probably be ending in my lifetime, has been taken over of that. So it's been an abdication. So the planners really aren't dictating how cities are done. They're dictating it to a loud mob, which in the most nefarious situations have really taken over the conversation to stop all building. Really by outsourcing their discrimination through the planning department, which is impotent in too many situations. So it's a big problem that we see, and I think in many ways we could say that I think it's a piece I haven't published yet, but effectively we made a wrong turn at Washington Square Park. Washington Square Park is where Jane Jacobs kicked Robert Moses in the nuts, metaphorically speaking. There's basically been 3 eras of planning in American history. There was a market era where all of our great cities were built, pretty much all of the historic districts were built that we save, and that ended broadly at Euclid, where it happened to be Moses rose right after Euclid was passed.
Shocking.
So there was the market era, there was an authoritarian era, which was white guys with Ivy League degrees saying we're smart, we have the data, trust us, there's a science, blah, blah, blah. Jane Jacobs ended that in 1961, and we've entered the participatory era, which has been an abdication to the mob that clearly is not working and is leading to suburbia and leading to corporatization and leading to NIMBYism and unaffordability and all these things. So I think in 1961, the problem was identified was correct. The authoritarian planning does not work. Central planning does not work. It's un-American and so forth. And rather than actually go back to what it did work and built all the places we love and were kind of the best cities in the world for 20, 40 years, were amazing, we decided to not do that and to go in a different direction.
I might put one little tweak on that, which would be, I think we kept the authoritarian part in the realm of infrastructure planning.
Oh, yeah.
And infrastructure planning and construction. So the planning profession got beaten up so much that it did abdicate its responsibility to the mob and to the participatory planning, but the infrastructure cult kept right along.
No
and,
question.
and to this day, still, you basically have infrastructure that's planned in a very, in a pretty blatantly authoritarian manner. That we have, we're the DOT. We know what is best. We have the money. We're going to do this. We don't care whether you like it or not. Maybe we'll tweak it a little bit and put a bike lane in on the side or a walking path, But it's going to continue in the same kind of expert stamped path as
and bigger and nuts. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's and I think there's probably a lesson here that governments naturally do that. Bureaucracies only grow. Bureaucracies can't do small, can't do incremental. The only direction it goes up. And we see that where, a government can't do bike planning, they can't do ADUs, because this incremental development is incompatible with sort of government planning, but it's also the antidote to it. I mean, the way you beat that is small things. Totally agree with you that it's much easier to incrementalize, humanize, and scale private development because it's so distributed, which is what central planners hate because they can't control it. And it's why you see left NIMBY planners throw shit fits when you re-legalize ADUs. They can't control it. It's like the people making decisions for themselves. So transportation work and infrastructure, whether it's streets, light rail, whatever, kind of, functionally can't be fixed because they're inherently public. You can get into some fringe libertarian stuff where we can privatize the trolley or whatever. But because of that, they're big and they're dumb, and they're only bigger and dumber the more we get. And I don't think there's any serious movement to sort of localize that stuff.
Yeah.
You see some micro bike planning, but even it falls prey to we've got to go get a CMAQ grant. CMAQ grant says we can't do buffered bike lanes and all this stupid stuff. and I think we were talking offline about one of the challenges is that public planners will never have the vested interest that private interests. There's just the pure motivation that comes with risk motive and reward motive. And so when it comes down to really, really, really have that fight to make the bike lane protected, there's just less desire to go through the brick wall to do it right than you'll see in private interests. Yeah. And so public infrastructure is suffering, and there's no clear solution to it in America.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough thing, and there's a natural human instinct to, you're going to follow whatever incentives make sense for you and your life and your job, and there's a natural human incentive in large organizations, whether they're corporate or public sector, to not stick your head up too much. We're going to get chopped off.
That's right. I mean, don't get fired. That's the first rule of a bureaucrat.
Exactly.
Don't rock the boat. And you see, I think that there's a little bit of I feel for so many of our young people, some of the most motivated urbanists to get into this go to planning school because they think that's how you get to build cities.
Yeah.
And it was great. Ellen Dunham Jones shouted out in the founders meeting yesterday here at CNU. It wasn't Ray Gendros. I think it was Peter Calthorpe, who's mostly been out. He hasn't been in an entitlement room probably in 30 years. and he said oh no, I group urban planners and urban designers, same group. And people are like, no.
Of course Peter does.
And Ellen Dunham Jones, she kind of yells back. She's like, urban designers draw and urban planners don't, and which is correct. And I think there's so many kids many kids who are going to get planning degrees actually should become developers. They want to go build cities, and they don't. They think that the planning degree allows them to do that, or they play. It's kind of the SimCity complex. Yeah. They think that we get to direct other people what to do, and they'll just listen. And they quit. It doesn't take long out of school to learn that. No, that's not.
Well, there's some of us who go to architecture school to become architects who have that same bug, and I actually feel similarly. And I really wish more architects would become developers.
Absolutely.
I think it's such a natural extent. You already develop an expertise to solve problems through design.
No question.
And if you're a good architect and you are not obsessed with novelty, you could be a great developer.
Oh, no question about it. And also, I would say that the best architects have developed. Not necessarily even well, but I good friends with Eric Kronberg. I know you've been through some incremental development yourself. There are, actually, most architects don't have the slightest clue what anything costs. Right. Why would they need to? And if you've just suffered through an ugly duplex, the not great triplex we once talked about, you have dirt under your fingernails and calluses in your fingernails, and you've suffered it, and you can be more empathetic to your clients. Same thing applies to planners, by the way. The best planners I've met have built an ADU. whatever the smallest increment of development is, they get it. They understand it. They can at least empathize with how difficult it is. And the ones who haven't, I mean, you can see people sort of off the rails with belief and dogma and ideology. It's such great writing in Matthew Crawford's book, Shop Class is Soulcraft. His most valid thesis in that, was a phenomenal book. He talks about that trade work is a natural cure for narcissism. So if you're in the business of fixing an old house, or building a table or something, or fixing an old house, let's use that example. You're submitting yourself to what somebody did before you. Right. You're having to honor their work and figure it out. You might be frustrated with them, but you're sort of submitting yourself to be part of a larger whole. And if you don't do that, there's so many people who are sort of frustrated that they can't execute or want people to listen to them because they have the credential or whatever. And you see people in trade who are very humbled, and you see people who don't execute as having that sort of hubrisity.
Sure. Yeah.
That an entitlement that could become sort of the angry, pissy people that make things difficult. And so I think there's nothing better an architect or planner or carpenter or plumber or anybody can do than go do this work. And it'll make you better at it. It'll make you more helpful to the people around you.
Yeah, I think that's right. I may have told you this story, but I was speaking at a planning conference a few years ago, a statewide APA deal, and I gave a session that was talking about ADUs, and I told the story about how I built a house in Kansas City, and I built the ADU illegally, and how I went ahead and then I ended up finishing it out without a building permit, and then rented it out, and like nobody cared, and it was a big deal. It was not a big deal for any of the neighbors or anything, and so I just kind of told this, like, I knew how to get around the process to do something that wasn't like stamped by the authorities. And it was just more like a confession about, here's a problem. This is a problem. Like, this should be easy and simple and legal. You shouldn't have to like go around the authorities to build an ADU in a historic neighborhood. Right. But the funny part was, after I told that story, like the hands went up in the air, and like other planners in the room started telling their own stories about how they basically had subverted the rules in their community that they knew about.
It's so funny.
To do something similar, and it was like a big room. It was like a group confessional.
It was so funny that it was something like at an APA conference. It was a city that had like just banned Airbnbs or tried to ban Airbnbs, like Asheville, and they were at like the APA conference in Indianapolis, and all showing like pictures of the 20 planners at an Airbnb, like all happy. And I mean, I get it. Obviously, the rules are so sort of absurd in some areas that less like there's a little bit of like, this is just how things work, that that there's an absurdity to it that they can't possibly be followed. But it is insane, and there's sort of
and the people who know how to manipulate it are, at an advantage. So.
I think that's true too, which is very unfair to young people, immigrants, renters, people of less wealth, people of less credentials, and that's one of the reasons why that's such an important fight for simplicity, and also the people who want to prevent housing or raise their own powers of objection are constantly lobbying for complexity, because it's how they also stop things. And so. I think that there's a great movement to simplify things that will probably be one of the results of the end of the participatory era. But it's, I don't know, so much work needs to happen that even some of it happened there. Even some of the best code writers in the world, many of which are, associated with the new urbanism, kind of inherently complicate things.
They do.
So there's really no code writer who will take a 6-figure check from a city and bring them back a 10-page code. Exactly. Just be like, actually, this works.
Or give them the 4-page Seaside code.
So there's a consultant quandary paradox. Like you can't justify your existence by simplifying it, I think is a problem. But that's needed for fairness. I mean, and for equity. Like, everybody should know what they own, what they can do with it. It's probably, you should get it in the mail once a year with your tax bill. Right. Oh yeah, you're RX5, you're on this big a lot, you could do a duplex, you could do an ADU, you're not required to do parking, and just let the citizenry know, because a bunch of them might be like, oh, I don't know, grandma needs a place to live. I don't know, we could build an ADU in the backyard. Like, most don't know, right? So it should be that simple. And again, going back to the old analogy of the eras of planning, it really was that simple until Euclid.
Yeah.
It's like grandma needs a place where after church we're building a barn, but you want to come over?
Exactly.
I mean, it doesn't need to be more complex than that.
Yeah, and I know your focus is housing, but we're having this conversation earlier with some other folks. But there's the similar things apply in commercial development as well, and there's a missing middle for commercial spaces as well. I think our friend Mike Thompson has done an incredible job illustrating it, but it's a big deal. I want to finish up by just mentioning not long ago, we both actually published pieces on the same day without talking to each other or knowing this was going to happen about our mothers.
Our late mothers, yeah.
Yeah, our late mothers. And so I thought what you wrote was really beautiful, and you talked about the music that you had written.
Yeah.
So I wonder if you could just share that real quick.
Sure. So my mother passed away 20 years ago this April, actually, pancreatic cancer. She was a professor at Carolina and at Michigan in early childhood education. And there's a big emotional lift with that, obviously, and it was transformative to me. I was fairly young when it happened. And my mother, who was a brilliant woman who I adored, was also kind of very, very private in a lot of ways. And raising two kids as a single mother, kind of as a gypsy professor all over the country, was difficult in all the ways you could imagine. But in kind of settling her estate, me and my sister found stacks of her poetry that she wrote in the 1960s, apparently had shared with nobody. And it was just amazing to process. She had a better gift of the language than I've ever had, and really beautiful stuff, and processing where she was in that transformative decade for her. And it was really 10 years after she died, and in many ways probably didn't deal with her death effectively until I did this, but I'm a musician, not necessarily a great one, just a hobbyist musician, and put her lyrics to song and kind of created an EP album with it. And so that was a very emotional lift to do, but very rewarding, and glad I did it, and gave her it was the honor I think I needed to give to her to give grace to her existence and early passing.
Yeah, and you shared some of the music on that post as well.
Yeah, so, I could not promise that it's great music. The story is is great, and I really enjoyed doing it. Honestly, I actually got to work with some of the best musicians in Durham in producing it, and learned a lot musically from it as well. But I think we all need art and ways to process our loved ones, and it can exist in different ways. But I don't think I would have had other ways of dealing with that trauma without that, and was blessed to be able to execute.
Yeah, it was a great story. It was very touching, and obviously it hit me at just the right time, having just recently lost my mom, and we also shared music. She loved music, and that was always a huge part of her life. It's always been a big part of my life. Oh. And so I really enjoy those stories. So,
well, when you need a bassist for your mom's album, you know who to call.
Everybody always needs a bassist.
That's true. That's how I've gotten this far in life. I'm the one guy. Everybody needs a bassist.
It's like aspiring musician, be a bass player.
That's right.
Because every band always needs a bass player.
You'll always be wanted.
That's right.
Lesson for life.
Aaron, thanks. This was a lot of fun.
Always love to. We need more podcasts in the world, and glad to. I think I'm officially a regular. This is great.
Yes, exactly. If you do something twice, you're a regular.
I'm a regular.
All right. Take care.
Thanks, Kevin.